Founders miss out on really branding themselves, not their companies, in increasingly social media hungry India.
Founder's story is sort of making sense because try and get a little bit more deeper, not into the TAM,
It's
right?
almost like a caption in my head right now. Let's not get into the TAM, let's get into the man.
Exactly. You're a man with words.
When they're getting on a call with you, what are 3 questions they should be ready to answer?
So who wins the race today? People who can communicate, people who have the narrative. We tell founders, be storytellers. So, we're very hesitant to talk about our own story.
Yeah.
And that includes me, by the way. I think I'm a little bit of an introvert, which most people don't believe it when I say
Really?
it.
Archana, you?
Fundraising will be fun. Like, why should I not be doing it? Let me do this. Then COVID happened, If my LPs had not stepped in, I don't know how we'd have raised it, but it was...
Welcome to another amazing episode of Damani Talks. I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about today because we're going to meet someone who's transforming literally an entire ecosystem. One of the, few but growing list of fund managers that are managing money and supporting innovation who also happen to be female, right? Not a word that I told you, Archana, that I like to say, but because I truly believe that excellence and foundership has no gender. But it really is exciting to continue to find people that are really taking this plunge, because it is, and we'll talk about this today, this is not the easiest job in the world.
Yes.
Right? And it unfortunately has been very male dominated, but that is changing, and I think India in many ways is leading the global change that is happening here. I want to please welcome Archana Jahagirdar, the inspiring founder and managing partner of Rukam Capital, who's truly making waves and reshaping the future of startups in India. Archana, welcome to Damani Talks.
Thank you so much for having me, and I think I'm very excited about this.
So, Archana, my first question always is, how are you feeling today?
Absolutely wonderful.
Okay, good. Tell me what's wonderful today.
Everything. I'm sitting here talking to you. I think it's going to be a great conversation. I think we have so much to exchange and share and understand, both our journeys and to know why we do what we do.
Absolutely. In fact, very interestingly, I just, when I was doing the research, realized we both started our funds around the same time. 2018-19, right? So we've seen 2 cycles apparently in or third cycle that we're in currently, right? But, Archana, we obviously read a lot about you in the media. We read a lot about you and the amazing work that you're doing. But I really want to understand, there's a bit of mystery about who was the Archana before she was this fund manager?
So, this Archana was the same Archana. It's just that I think the Archana is more visible now, I would say, is because of the job that I do today.
Okay.
I think, the VC business is a new asset class in India. I think it's misunderstood to some extent. And I was fairly, under the radar till quite recently because, there's so much that you need to do when you're setting up a fund and, when you get it going. But you realize that you do need to get your voice heard. You do need to put, your sort of brand name out there because... you are ultimately, you have to establish a brand to attract founders, to attract talent, to attract, of course, LPs. And of course, to be part of the mix, which is hoping to make a difference to the overall ecosystem and, of course, to the VC space, I think. I think there's a lot that's not understood about VC.
And I think that's not just a area, and we'll come back to the Rukam Capital and the journey there. But that's not just an area that VCs have missed out on, but I think even founders miss out on really branding themselves, not their companies, correctly, and talking about their story. Because in an increasingly social media hungry India, people want to know the stories behind the brand. They want to know, hey, there is a Rukam, but Rukam is just, it's not a real person. Right?
Yeah.
Who's the person running Rukam? That's who we want to know, and that's whose story we resonate with. Do we resonate with that person? And it's happening more and more. You're seeing more and more Bollywood stars, getting behind brands, and people want to know who they are beyond of whatever persona that they've put out. But you've had a very, very interesting start. You started out at Times of India, and then you were a senior assistant editor at Business Standard, and then you also did the director and CEO of eSpace Corporate Initiatives. This whole journey of your life, I think a lot of it, obviously, because you have an MA in English Lit, right?
Yeah. So I think, if I were to sort of define myself with one word, I think the word is contrarian.
Okay.
And I think maybe that's what's useful to be an early stage investor, is to have a slightly contrarian sort of way
Very true.
to think. And also, it's about how India was and is now as a country. So if you look at, developed economies like the US, I think there is a better understanding that life or your education and what you eventually do at different parts of your career are not one sort of linear sort of extension, one sort of, thing leading to another in this very, very sort of pat picture perfect sort of thing. And if you see how the US education system is also organized, what you study, and then when what your final major is, and then what you finally end up sort of working, can be pretty diverse, right? I think in India we like our silos, and we like that if it's an engineer, then an engineer will build X sort of engineering product, whereas to my mind pretty much everything that you do, and it doesn't matter what you study, is based on logic. So, I mean, I don't think most people understand that language and how you communicate is as much about logic as, let's say, engineering is, for example.
Right.
You look at numbers are based on logic again. So, to imagine that you need a degree in finance to understand finance, to my mind, is a huge, sort of mythology that we have sort of, built ourselves and said that, okay, you went to an engineering college, so let me just now, for the rest of my life, I can only be an engineer, for example, right? So, and if you look at investing in the US, and, the VC industry, of course, started in the US. So one of the most successful investors in the world is Mike Moritz, and he was a journalist.
Yeah.
His bulk of his career was as a writer and a journalist, and then he transitioned to Sequoia, and went on to become one of the most successful partners for Sequoia. And the companies that he sort of sourced and invested were all tech companies. So the point being that investment, to my mind, is based on logic. And because you're like when you're trying to look at something that doesn't exist, right? So when Google was invested, there was search engines, but what it could be didn't exist, right? So it's about being able to extrapolate from a imperfect data set.
Correct.
Right? And I think if you allow a mix of facts and imagination to sort of coalesce in a good sort of a way, then you end up investing in Google, right?
Yeah,
or
very
Apple, or any of these companies which did not follow a perfect path.
And in fact, I think it's also important to note that no startup starts out the way they want it to start out. They always end up into a product that becomes successful. You talk of any company, Netflix, didn't really start out as Netflix, right? We talk about, let's say, Flipkart, right? What Flipkart is today versus what it started out, or why Amazon is so successful. Bulk of its revenues does not come from the original business that it started out with, right? So flexibility to pivot needs to be there, and I think you're absolutely right. I think some of the best stock investors that I know were actually engineers. I don't know whether they understand the graphs better than anybody else.
No, look at Jim Simmons, right? He was a math professor, created the quant way of investing, and changed how you invest, right? So that's my point. See, what happens is that, in fact, it's a very interesting story. So I was talking to a potential LP yesterday. And the question he, of course, asked me was, what's your background? So I was telling him, and we were talking about, and I said, when I started Rukam, and I said to myself, I will not have a single write-off. He said, that's because you don't come from the finance industry, and that's why you could think like that. Because if you had come from the finance sort of background, you'd have gone with a standard sort of, that I just need one outlier and that's it, So I think it's very, very important to be able to look at a problem with a fresh set of eyes. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it happens when you're an outsider. When you're an insider, you know all the reasons not to do something. And also you end up doing more of the same, right? And the world doesn't need more of the same of anything.
Correct.
You always need a fresh way to... And then the other question that I get asked a lot is, but, writing, and but investing. And I'm like, early stage investing, my friend, is not about Excel sheets. it's really about trying to understand what can be, which is how a writer thinks, right? You learn to ask questions, and to be able to ask questions, you do your own research, right? And you've got to get to an
I love that concept of yours that you have to be that it's about being a writer and being able to almost crystal gaze or what could be.
Yeah.
And then that really gives you not a right, but maybe an advantage of dreaming what the founder wants to dream. Is that what you were trying to get at?
Also, it allows you to sort of have a little bit of a bullshit filter. You see, when you're a writer, you're also you're a little cynical because you feel it's all done, right? So you tend to push a little bit more to try and get a little bit more deeper, not into the TAM.
Right.
Because, God knows what's the TAM, right? The TAM can shrink and the TAM can, get created. And we've seen so many examples of that. But you want to make sure that the founder's story is sort of making sense. Because ultimately, as a writer, you write stories. I mean, non-fiction, but they're still stories, right? So when you
It's
write...
almost like a caption in my head right now. Let's not get into the TAM, let's get into the man.
Exactly. You're a man with words. So you try and get much more into... So, over the years, I have a far more crystallized answer when people ask me that, what do you look for, when you're looking? And my answer is crystal clear now. It's the founder. I mean, again, I get into trouble sometimes when I say I almost don't care about TAM, and then people say, what do you mean? You must care about TAM. And so what I'm trying to say is that if I was to look at it logically, I mean, if the founder doesn't have ability, you could be in a very large TAM. And, there are so many examples of that. I mean, every day those examples are around us, right? And great founders create their own TAM. So, which is why we all look up to a Steve Jobs or a Elon Musk or somebody like a Dipinder. But what was the TAM for Zomato? Zero. Kuch nahi tha. Right? And what was the TAM for Blinkit? Kuch nahi tha. I mean, Zepto, kya tha? There was no TAM. So, I think the ability to be able to see the dream that the founder is dreaming. At the same time, you're a little cynical, so you don't completely buy into it, because that's the danger. That's where you could really, really fail. So, and that has got translated in how we look at deals. So we are very happy to do deals which others are not doing, in sectors that others are not doing.
Very interesting.
And we lead, even if there's nobody else to lead with us. Because I feel, and those are the deals that have done well for us, To some extent, I feel we've not given in to any FOMO yet. Hopefully, we'll be able to keep that DNA. It's always hard. But if you have a little bit of cynicism along with imagination and the ability to ask, the right questions, because you've done the work.
Right.
I mean, you still have to do the work, right? You have to study, you have to try and understand what is, getting built here. And to my mind, as a VC, you cannot be an expert, because how do you become an expert in the future? Because we are all betting on the future. So how do you become an expert in that, right? You can't become an expert in what could become our future, right? But what you need to know is to be able to spot that trend early enough and take a little bit of a calculated call that this will become mainstream versus something else that's going to fizzle away.
True.
And that's pretty much how a writer goes about it,
And in somewhere in that journey of, that I think before you had Rukam, you had Angel Works, and I think before that you were at IN. What was that reason to switch? I mean, was there something that you saw, something that you...
So as a writer, the one big disadvantage that is there, and, if I ever get the chance to ask Mike Moritz this question, I probably will ask his motivation. But my motivation was that you're still a bystander. You're not part of the action.
Very interesting.
Right? And I felt that
Were you writing about startups at the time?
I mean, I was writing about business. I was writing about, larger sort of stories, again, similar to...
Because 7 to 10, I entered the ecosystem around 11, right? And I remember when we used to write 500K, that time was 2 crore. So koi puchta bhi nahi tha. Nobody would even put it.
नहीं, but you see, the other advantage of being a writer and a journalist is you get access to a lot of things which others don't have access to,
Correct.
right? So I knew a lot of people, so I did have a lot of access, and I could pick people's brains. So I knew the early trends.
You feel the vibe coming
Yeah. You could see the magic happening, and the so-called the first generation of wealth creators had happened, already, and you could see, I mean. Again, these are ordinary people who walked amongst us, and then suddenly they become extraordinary, right? So you do have access to that sort of story and that sort of what led to that sort of outside success. And in India especially, very few things give people that kind of I mean, if you want to escape a poor destiny, the best way to do is by being in the startup ecosystem, because you can escape that negative destiny.
Very true.
And you could begin to see it around you, whereas everything else that was there, was, you were locked into that destiny.
Right.
And that to me is very boring, and it's I mean, I don't like accepting status quo. I want to challenge status quo.
And I think thankfully, I mean, to your point, I think thankfully over the last 5-6 years at least, people are breaking out, right? You're seeing that, okay, I don't have to be a corporate slave in finance because that's all I knew my entire life. I can do something different, and I've found at least very interesting founders, and your story also being one, which is like was doing something completely different, right? And then said, you know what, just because I've been called a tree my entire life, I'm not a tree. Right?
Yeah.
To quote Rachel here, right?
I think you're a writer. I think I want to flip this whole sort of conversation.
No, I do write actually. So I started blog, and I tell you, I think some of the best VCs have also been good bloggers.
No, that's exact. So I was just coming to that, So if you, again, Peter Thiel recently said this, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember verbatim what he said. He said, let's say last couple of decades were about engineers and coding. But now, because let's assume that generative AI is solving a lot of, how you sort of code and how the tech sort of goes forward. So who wins the race today? People who can communicate, people who have the narrative. We tell founders, be storytellers.
Yeah.
But, as Indians also, we're very hesitant to talk about our own story.
Yeah.
And that includes me, by the way. I don't like talking about my own story very much. I think I'm a little bit of an introvert, which most people don't believe it when I say
really?
it.
Archana, you?
Yeah. But I think if you, and like Jeff Bezos has said it, Steve Jobs has said it.
In fact, there are two VCs. There's one called avc.com. avc.com and the other one is feld.com. They've recently stopped writing a lot, but AVC, I think since 15 years, wrote a daily blog.
Wow.
Every single day. And it inspired me. I mean, I wish I had been as regular, but there was a period in I think late in the mid 2010s where I wrote a blog every day for 65 days or 70 days, and I numbered it and I used to wake up in the morning, write a blog, and I said, you know what, it doesn't have to be a good blog, it doesn't have to be a great blog, it just has to be a blog, and that would serve as my reminder of what I learned that day, which I wanted the world to know, right? And sometimes when I go back and I look at my very old blogs and I realize, you know what, I can at least go back and reminisce about the thought process I had that morning of what I had experienced the previous day, and I think and I believe that every investor, maybe even every founder, whether you're, it doesn't have to be writing. Maybe not everybody is as good of a writer as you are, or maybe as experienced as writing as I am, because I went to a school that forced you to write. But do voice notes. Do something that day when it gets done, the lessons of that day are crystallized. Otherwise, our brain plays very funny things with us, because 10 years later, it makes you think of a situation
memory is not
it's not the best, right?
It should not depend. But, what I would actually take a harder stance, I would say you should write, because, and the point I was making about what, Jeff Bezos has said, what Steve Jobs has said, Paul Graham, wrote eloquently, and with great, because it helps you understand who you are,
right,
and your motivations. And it doesn't matter whether you do it for the world or you do it for yourself. but it really, really helps you understand who you are. So when, if a founder, for example, of an operating business that we all, let's say, look at, were to do it, they don't need to worry about a pitch deck. They don't need to worry about what am I going to say to this investor, because you know what you want to say.
Correct.
It's just so clear. You know why you're doing this. So therefore, if you can't raise a round, if every VC has said no to you, you don't get demoralized,
Right.
because you know that there's a higher purpose. And writing takes you to that higher purpose.
Very interesting.
And that's very important, because if like I was telling you, when I was seeing people around me, great heights of success because of how they had started up. And I was like, okay, this is a good way to make money. And then somebody said to me and said, that's not how you should look at it. And I really debated this, that is it our socialist overhang that we still have, that money is not something we should aspire to. But the more you go deeper into questions like this, is it money that should sort of motivate you, or is there a higher purpose? And it's really interesting how, that thought crystallizes. And the more that crystallizes, then the hard days are just fine.
Yeah.
You're able to sail through them. It doesn't destroy you completely. It doesn't kill your self-belief and self-worth completely. And that's why writing is so important.
It's true that if you're chasing money, it's okay. But if you're defining yourself with money, that's probably not okay, right? Because then that can go up and down.
I don't know. I've not given it enough thought. But so again,
Because I've seen people that, like on the stock markets, right? Now, stocks could go up every single day, but then they're down 20%.
You're destroyed.
You're destroyed. But you're like, it was paper money the entire time until you sold. That money was never yours. Like, or there was this one article, which I always find very funny, that 3 days after, I think, the Ambani vending or something, that his Ambani loses 75,000 crores. And you're like, how? He wasn't selling in the first place, so how did he lose 75,000 crores? But the media really has a fun day with it. Coming to this angel journey, right? You started out with IAN, and you were there for a couple of years?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you...
So I was basically, trying to set up an accelerator. Actually,
Acha.
that's the honest truth.
Okay.
Because
IAN Alpha or something? No. What is
no, so IAN had an IAN incubator.
it? Uh-huh.
And they were trying to sort of try and do something bigger. And in that journey, I thought, okay, let me branch out on my own and let
Very
me,
interesting.
start my own incubator. Accelerator, actually, not even an incubator, because at that time I thought to myself that incubator is an old idea.
Yeah.
Now we need accelerators, because, why should a founder be sitting for a year in this so-called incubator? I mean, you need to give a bullet, to a founder, and 3 months is more than enough for
Yeah,
a founder
absolutely.
to
I
sort
agree
of,
with that.
And the other way I thought about this was, I said, okay, won't take equity, we'll charge like a fee, like it'll be like a course, so it'll be a
acceleration
fee.
fee, yeah.
It'll be a fee. And, you sort of open up doors, give them access, to various people from different walks of life, whatever, not have a structured course, but
Okay.
sort of have, mostly provide access, actually. That was to, whatever would be there.
When IAN's network is really large.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Or is
So,
really large. Right?
yeah. So, and then when I thought of doing it on my own, because I also did have a network, and I thought, I'll bring, and I spoke to some people, and they said, yeah, you're very happy to give back. So by that time, there was enough, there were enough people already who, both from the corporate world and from the startup ecosystem, who wanted to give their time, and there weren't that many, the number of founders was not that large, right? So it was easier to sort of give time. But what I realized very quickly was that I could have put Jeff Bezos in front of these founders. After the first conversation, the second question used to be, are you writing a check? And I'm like, okay, the market is telling me something that, that these guys are. And you realize again that the need for capital is so intense in India that a founder puts their needs very clearly in front of you. And you can't possibly ignore it and say, oh, no, I signed up to give you some gyan or get you some gyan or access. And they're like, no, we need something tangible like capital. So that's how the whole thing. And I was talking to a bank at that time, and the conversation was fairly advanced, and because it's a listed entity, they were having their internal sort of approvals. In the interim, I got a couple of big investors who said, look, why don't you just deal source for us, and let's look at the entire startup.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
An early stage again. Okay.
Early stage, because these guys had lots of access to very later stage, and of course they had access to capital markets. And anyway,
they were not funds themselves, they were
no,
just
individuals.
Okay.
So the thing was that let's look at early stage, and that's basically I said, okay, fine, this is what I'm hearing from the founders. Let me do deal sourcing for these two. And because we didn't have a name, so I had a company, and SEBI doesn't allow you to use the name before you get the license, right? So we created a quick name called Angel Works, and
I like the name though.
Yeah, I like it too, and it did well actually, because it got a little bit of salience with founders. So and because the entire regulatory framework at that time was already moving towards basically MCA was not willing to let you hold in a private limited, equity in private limited or in LLP, because then there was a certain
NBFC,
threshold, and I think there was a concerted
attempt. So then
attempt.
AngelWorks would invest also, or that was not the platform?
No. So as AngelWorks, you would deal source, and these two
investors would invest.
Would put their money directly, and with the idea that this would morph into a fund, because like I said, it was not possible for individuals to come together, right? I mean, there was no way.
Yeah.
And that's how Rukam happened, because the market basically told me that nobody's interested in Gyan. They all want money.
Well, also I think there's no alignment, right? When you're not willing to put money behind something, at least in the founder's mind, and this may be if you're willing to give me Gyan but not money.
If you talk to founders, and even today I'll say this, you talk to founders and they'll say, can you introduce us to so and so? We want to really learn from that person. And I'm like, hello, you don't want to learn from that person,
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you're right. I mean, of course, we now...
क्योंकि वो old adage है ना अपने इकोसिस्टम में कि जब पैसे चाहिएंगे तो ज्ञान मिलेगा और ज्ञान मांगे तो पैसे मिलेंगे.
बिल्कुल.
And so Rukam Capital, right? So it starts in June 2019 so Fund 1 was what was the size? And
so 150 crores.
Okay.
But again, what happened is we said that we'll start as a small fund. We said we'll start as a 40 crore fund.
Wow.
Yeah, because the idea again, contrarian thinking, was not to spend your time trying to raise capital. The idea was to deploy capital.
Correct.
So that's how we wanted, and that was my...
And this was not a syndicate, this was a fund.
No, it's a Cat 2 blind pool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and my core strength is deal sourcing. My core strength is not fundraising.
Got it.
So I didn't want to spend too much time trying to raise a very large capital. And around the same time, Sauce had also come up, and Sauce, I think, had a similar sort of corpus. And I think at that time, because SEBI was encouraging, even smaller funds to come up. So we said, fine, 20 crores was your first close. We did the first close as soon as we got the license. In September, we did our first close. And we said, okay, we will start deploying. And we started deploying. So we had done 3 deals. And
do you remember the first 3 deals?
Yeah. We did Godesi, Henry and Smith, Bread Company. These were and Swami. 4 deals actually.
Swami, okay. The Swami Tonic Smith.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had done 4 deals. And then, of course, COVID happened. And we had done Burger Singh as well. Sorry.
Oh, wow.
We had done Burger Singh as well. So...
very much consumer focused.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when I was deal sourcing for these 2, private individuals, we were looking at the entire gamut. We were looking at tech, we were looking at consumer, we were looking at, and there was a lot of inbound, and of course we did a lot of work to source deals as well. And when we started and when we were filing our PPM, we said we'll also have a lot of, adjacent categories like distribution, warehousing, logistics, anything that sort of enhances the whole consumer story. But I mean, we didn't end up doing a bunch of those deals. So we looked at EV, we looked at gaming, we looked at the whole Tharasio models when they came up. So we looked at everything as we sort of went along.
And what stage were you trying to get in at?
because we were 40 crores, we said we could only do early stage, right?
Right.
So we said,
Like, as in, like, did it have to be pre-product or
no,
pre?
we wanted revenue.
Okay.
And we said, for any consumer company, it should be at least 30-40 lakhs monthly net revenue. And at that
And
time,
Rukam, you also have a partner, right?
no, I'm a solo
You're
GP.
solo. So then, what you did you start off as a solo GP with a team, or what? How did you
So
go about
I
that?
started off as a solo GP. I had some young sort of team members which I was able to hire, because when we were doing the private sort of deal sourcing, we had hired some young,
Acha.
people. So that sort of helped. But what happened is that I realized very quickly, between the kind of LP reporting, and then of course we were also reaching out to potential LPs and trying to talk to them to see if there would be any interest. And again, I think it helps when you've not done something for the first time. And I thought, oh, fundraising will be fun, like why should I not be doing it, let me do this. So we were doing everything at the same time, like there was deployment was happening,
LP calls are going on.
potential LP calls were, and then COVID happened, and I was like, okay, that's a curveball if ever there was one, And because like most of our portfolio companies were so young, and I still remember I had met one potential LP. He'd come to the office, was very happy, and then he was traveling, and I was following up saying that, listen,
When are you going to sign the people?
yeah, and are
the
you
contribution?
interested?
Yeah.
I mean, are you interested? Does it look something interesting? And he said, oh, I'm in London. And, so he had come with a couple of his colleagues. He said, you please speak to my colleague, and, he'll sort of. And I was like, okay. And they signed the contribution agreement. I think, literally the skin of our teeth, because, had COVID already happened, I don't know if that contribution agreement would have got signed. And, he signed it. And I was like, wow, I've signed an LP. And then COVID happened. And I was like, okay, now this is a curveball if ever, there's a curveball. But what happened, I think, was also a lot of luck. And which is, again, the reason I don't like dwelling too much on, what one has done right or wrong, because I think if luck is not on your side,
Oh yeah.
you could do a lot and still not really get, very far. And he said, you know what? You're doing a great job on deal sourcing. Let me try and help you. So a couple of my LPs said, look, we'll try and help you, and maybe we should have a larger fund size. This COVID had happened, lockdown had happened, But we were all thinking that, maybe it's and not enough, and not enough cases were, had emerged at that point. So everybody's like, is this excessive, and everybody thought it'll all be okay. And I remember raising the fund over Zoom calls. If my LPs had not stepped in, I don't know how we'd have raised it. But it was their idea that, listen, there's a great deal flow, and maybe this needs to. So then we said, from 40, we said 60 to 100, 100 to 150.
Wow.
That's how it happened. So a lot of our early deals, therefore, were very opportunistic from a size perspective, because every time I used to think, acha, now I'm deploying out of a 60 crore fund. So, the way you're deploying becomes very different. Then it became, we're deploying out of a 100 crore fund. So you think differently. So, and then of course all the challenges of COVID.
So eventually when was the final close for your fund?
21. Yeah.
And that's when 150 crore was the size. And then the strategy, was that evolving as you went along? Or?
Yes and no again. Yeah. So, so some of my LPs, I must say, were very supportive. And what I used to do is, so you remember the go-go years, that happened during COVID, right? Suddenly valuations were mad. They were, the country was awash with startup deals. And of course, new sort of, categories were emerging. There were a lot of conversation about, like this consumer behavior has completely changed and all of that. And I used to discuss this a lot. Now, what happened is that we would see, therefore, all kinds of deals, right? In our PPM, we had said we'd only do post-revenue. We said we'll never do pre-revenue unless there's some crazy sort of, exception. And we now there was so much craziness in the market that pre-revenue companies were getting funded at some crazy valuation. And the question I would ask myself is that am I going to get outpriced in the market? Because how do I get into these deals? Because
Yeah.
ultimately I still have only 150 crores. And then we also looked at a lot of later stage consumer deals, and we looked at some logistics deals as
Acha.
well. And like I said, we looked at some gaming deals. And we used to ask, I used to debate these questions with some of my LPs, who are now sort of also our advisors, to say that, should we be doing a later stage deal, for example? And, if you have supportive LPs who are willing to bring their experience to the table, it really helps to talk, and sort of try and
They
understand.
can be a guiding box for you, right?
Because the thing was that it was a moment that I think nobody had seen, right? And there was just so much madness. And like when we started, there was Sauce, there was Fireside, and everybody was, I mean, in their own lanes and collaborative, but also nobody was mad in, I mean, nobody was giving crazy valuations, or nobody was in this deal heat, that those go-go years saw. So you really needed the wisdom and counsel of people who had seen a lot more and were willing to share. And this is what I mean by luck, because I mean, some LPs I've who were are my LPs, I've known from earlier. They've been friends, but in the case of some, I had not known them earlier. But how much they've given of themselves to sort of bring their experience to the table. So when there was a lot of pressure on valuations, when down rounds started, sometimes when founders would want a certain sort of counsel, and LPs were available to founders, to me, to sort of help think through some of these and I think that's the magic which makes building something really interesting.
And I think you put it well, because in many ways, if you look at the journey you've been talking about, is also the journey of a founder, right? And I think many founders don't realize how difficult it is to raise a venture fund,
Yeah.
right? Because because it's much easier to raise for an idea that you can see,
Yeah.
than to say that I will find ideas that I will see and then evaluate, and I will evaluate them better than you can, and hence I will put together a fund for it.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult journey, not for everybody, right? But I think it's very important to understand we are founders too, right? Sudhir from Charity says it best, that we're venturepreneurs, right? And it is we have to put these brandings together, these portfolios together, and the founder or that portfolio is the product,
Yeah.
right? And that we have to say, yes, we put like any health health snacking brand, right? They have to show the ingredients.
Yeah.
I promised you zero trans fat, and the ingredients there is vegetable
Yeah.
hydrogenated vegetable oil, so zero trans fat nahi ho sakta hai.
Uh,
So similarly, we have to say कि I gave a PPM in which this was supposed to happen,
Yeah.
and then I gave you a portfolio in which this has happened, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where we land up eventually.
So, I wrote a piece to say this, that, also our policymakers see VC and startup as two different sort of buckets. VC sort of goes under somewhere under
Private equity.
Which is actually, it's not private. I mean, it doesn't fall. Private equity is really a different business.
I'm saying the regulator always clubs us in everything.
Exactly. But my point is that, it's such a symbiotic relationship, because startups need us, and we, of course, need startups, right? And if you think one will succeed without the other, it's not going to happen. If you want a certain velocity, right? I mean, or if you want to go back to, how things used to be, that once in a, billion somebody will emerge and build something. You don't want that. You
Correct.
want, multiple companies to sort of emerge. You look at the US example, if you see, the companies that dominate their stock exchanges, they're all VC funded companies, right? I mean, the $1 trillion sort of companies that exist in the US are all venture backed companies. So, I mean, the opportunity is so incredible. But not to see VCs as founders, I think, is is a misstep that we are doing, because I think you do need to support those who are building for the domestic market, because capital has to be organized. Capital has to be organized in a way that there's there's an entire sort of ecosystem of every step,
Right.
So I mean, like sometimes on panels people talk about that there's no liquidity in India, and I'm like, but like, where are the secondaries funds? Where, I mean, you don't even have enough A, B, C Indian funds, right? I mean, you look at the entire tech ecosystem, Tiger and SoftBank goes out of the market, the whole thing comes crumbling
Yeah,
down.
absolutely. True.
And which ecosystem can afford that? So we need our own sort of, entire spectrum of capital, and that's where, this asset class will really come in its own. So you really have to club both together, because we are founders. I mean, it's much harder to keep all the balls up in the air. You're dealing with multiple regulators, you're dealing with LPs who ask you hard questions, and you have founders who ask you hard questions.
Exactly. I was going to say that. And sometimes your team is asking you
Yeah,
hard questions.
also.
This thesis you came up with may not be working.
Yeah.
And like, no, just calm down. Like, it's 2022. I think everything seems to be very rosy. Let it just slow down a little bit.
I was trying to hire somebody, and I must say it's been a good hire. And he asked me, what's your rent lease? And I was like, okay, now, so I mean, we are founders, because literally, you got to keep the lights on in the office.
I think we're beyond founders. I mean, I'm not trying to glorify us in any which way, but I'm just saying that it really is in many ways, because like you said, the team, we have to keep the team motivated through multiple down cycles.
Yeah.
I mean, both of us started funds around the same time. We saw an upcycle in 18-19. 19, and we were already towards the end of the upcycle. Then COVID made sure that was the complete end of the down cycle. Sorry.
Yeah.
And then 2020, suddenly by the end of 2020, everything was rosy. 2021 was ballistic, and then it went super ballistic in 22. And now it's been 2 years, right? And you have to keep reminding the team that this is also a cycle. And unlike a business in which one quarter we can change the cycle, in venture it takes 2 to 3 years to recover from a cycle.
Yeah. Also, I think a lot of people want to get into venture because it looks sexy and glamorous. But I just think it's like scrubbing walls all day, because it's anything but glamorous.
I just had an interview yesterday, and I was telling somebody that that they wanted to join venture, and I said, why? Because I want to learn about startup. I said, you can read the newspaper for that, right? But if you want to be a venture investor, this is a 30-year journey that you're getting on, right?
Yeah.
And if you're doing anything less than 30 years, don't get on this journey, because whatever you learn here is absolutely nonsense if you're not going to be here for the 30 different cycles you have to go through.
Yeah.
How big is your team, by the way, at Rukam?
So we are now 13 people.
13, wow.
Yeah. Because, I mean, we are ramping up. We are now in, Fund 2.
Okay. Is that the Rukam Sitara fund?
No, Rukam Sitara is our tech fund.
Okay.
Which we've already launched. We've done some investments from there as well.
So that's different from Rukam's
consumer
strategy.
Yeah. Because, again, like the way we look at consumer is very different from the way we look at tech. I also feel that as India is evolving in its journey from a capital perspective, I think the sector agnostic funds don't work as well anymore.
Okay.
I think you need to have a little bit more sort of not a very narrow focus, but some focus as to why certain
thematic almost, right? Yeah.
A little bit, because I think we will get even more sort of segmented the way it is in the US. Also, again, the reason we did the tech fund was because our LPs, I mean, some of our LPs wanted us to, think about, like I said, we had looked at an entire gamut in Fund 1, but we did 2 companies, you could say, which are consumer tech in its DNA. But because we were seeing so many deals, we felt that there was, place to do a completely different...
So how big is the Sitara fund now?
So we are raising this fund right now. So we've done the first close at 20 crores. So again, I think the way I want to play it is very similar to the way I played the earlier fund. Yeah, again, do about 100, 150 crore kind of a fund, deploy quickly, and really, come to a point where you say, okay, so I think the 4-year sort of window that you have to deploy, you really do finesse your understanding, because also that ecosystem is also evolving at the same time as you are.
That makes sense.
And that cross section really, I think, leads to some good
So
investments.
how are you splitting the capital? Like 150 crores, is it just all one check, or is it like, are you doing follow-ons? How are you splitting it
No,
up?
we do follow-ons. See,
So
again,
usually your first check would be how much?
so it's been a bit opportunistic so far.
I understand because of that.
Yeah,
But what is your typically
I
targeting
mean,
now?
it could be anything. I mean, we've done very small checks also, but I would say roughly about 3 to 4 crores is what we like to do as a first check.
And you're holding 10-15%?
Roughly 10. I mean, 15 becomes, and we also don't want to go too deep into, when the pricing gets too expensive.
Right.
So we try and not go above 10. I mean, we have gone above 10 in some cases, but I think that was more a case because of COVID, because we had to support some companies. Some of the companies were so young and we had just put in money. They couldn't, I mean, we thought they wouldn't survive unless we sort of, gave them a little bit more money. So you also have to respond to what's happening in your external environment. So again, one thing I think in venture, which is considered an absolute no-no in the US, is that, you wait for external validation after your sort of first check. But again, I think India is an atypical market because there isn't so much capital available. So, and, again, we are a more shallow market compared to the US. I mean, we are playing in a $3.5 trillion pool. They play in a $45 trillion sort of market. So it does take time for founders to come to what I would call product market fit. And when I say product market fit, it's not that, the way it's, I think, understood in the US. Here, I think you need to see a little bit more to really know what's working, right? And the only people who are going to give you more capital is your existing investors, because by that time, they have more confidence in the founder, right? I mean, for a new investor to come in, they're going to ask all the hard questions, and rightly so, So I do feel that in India, we do need to relook at this, that, we'll do one round and let somebody else come in and price it.
Interestingly enough, Archana, I think that mindset is changing because when we started investing in 12, 13, we had a very clear thesis, 3 round karna hi hai, right? 1, 2, 3 has to happen. Decision is whether we want to do the next 2 or not, right? But at least all the conversations that I'm having now, everybody is now saying I have to reserve. And maybe the ideal would have been 20 at seed and 80 at follow-on.
Yeah.
But people are getting to 50-50, some are getting to 60-40, whatever that number is. But they're understanding that follow-on needs to happen.
Yeah.
But it was a very angel mindset, very rare, by the way. I've not seen this anywhere else in the world. But India was a very rare angel mindset कि 1 round करो और भूल जाओ, right? फिर वो जिएगा मरेगा उसके ऊपर है.
But we are still undercapitalized as a country, right? And especially for the startup ecosystem. So you can't again play by the same rules that the US has set.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you don't want to drink your own Kool-Aid. You don't want to, sort of hide the problems in a startup, and you don't want to give money.
No, be discerning. I'm just saying that, angels, at least in the US, the way because I spent about 12 years there, they are willing to back a company up to Series A. And they'll write incrementally bigger checks. I've actually seen angels do an entire Series A themselves also. Like,
No, but that's what I'm saying. Here, I find that if, in there are lots of sectors where, let's say, funds are not willing to invest. So angels say that sort of graduates to, let's say, family offices doing the checks. And then there's a little bit of thing that, they couldn't get in. And my point is, so what? A founder has to capitalize a company correctly. We are undercapitalized at this moment, to my mind. I mean, we don't even have capital at Series A, let alone B, C, D. And I said,
true.
Forget the Tiger SoftBank sort of, levels, which really is what we need the whole sort of, ecosystem to sort of get built out. So I think we need to stop. And I think the narrative in the media needs to pretty much stop that, this person couldn't, and, existing investors, as if existing investors' money is somehow more tainted, or,
I
I think
actually
we
love
need to-
that. Let the company not be known to the world till it's ready.
Yeah,
I'll
exactly.
keep pumping in more money till it
Yeah,
does, right?
exactly. And I think, this very shallow sort of narrative that, if X has invested, it's somehow a better company versus if Y has invested, it's a not so great company. I think let there be a level playing field. I mean, it's hard as it is for founders to build, and I don't think it's fair to sort of undermine them because they couldn't raise money, from a fund versus they had to raise it from an angel or a family office. I
So,
think
Archana, what's the best way for founders to reach out to you?
my email is archana@rukamcapital.com.
Archana at rukamcapital.com.
Yes.
Perfect. And when they're getting on a call with you, what are 3 questions they should be ready to answer?
How do you get this idea?
Okay.
What do you want to build?
Okay.
And how many rounds of capital do you think you're going to need for it to reach, if it's in consumer, 100 crore sort of top line company, if it's in tech, what will give you that sort of escape velocity? Because I think not enough founders spend time trying to think through, especially the capitalization question, because I think undercapitalizing a company or overcapitalizing are both ruinous. So it's very important for a founder to have that mindset. It may not be a perfect, it won't be in fact a perfect answer, but it's important to understand capital. It's important to understand that you can't strangle growth if you're getting it, or because that industry you didn't understand it enough as a founder, so you sort of raise too little and then that cripples you forever. I mean, then to recover from that becomes really, really hard. So for me, it's important that a founder understands the importance of capitalizing their companies.
Actually, Archana, I think you really opened my eyes. The fact that you were a writer and are an investor.
I'm still a writer.
Yeah, I mean, rather full-time writer, put it that way. But the way you've been able to articulate this answer is very unique, because obviously that it must be second muscle, like instant for you to put this together in terms of logical flow. Archana, it really has been an amazing conversation. I think it like you said, you still are a writer, but being able to articulate that, because I think a lot of the times we as fund managers are trying to explain concepts to our LPs also, and even to our founders that seem so alien to them. And sometimes what seems, in fact, I was during my event day before yesterday, one of the founders said that what you're saying sounds so counterintuitive, but is the way you're saying it makes the difference. I said, yes, that's the job that we have to do. And I think I really agree with you with the fact that we as VCs really have to be fantastic communicators.
Yeah.
And there definitely is a case for writers to become VCs, and probably VCs should become writers if they want to be a very good VC. So before I go to rapid fire, and rapid fire is what everybody looks forward to, is there anything you'd like to say before we move there?
I think you've got a way with words, and I think it's always a joy. I find it always exciting to talk to people who have paid attention to what they want to say, how they want to say it. I think we have ignored such a fundamental and powerful skill that we all have, which is words and our ability to communicate, because that's how human beings understand each other, right? I mean, nobody's going to understand each other through an Excel sheet. Let's be honest, no matter how beautiful an Excel sheet is, it doesn't tell you everything that you need to know. And all of us, whether as investors or consumers, or even when we are sort of trying to understand that, do I want to hang out with somebody, it's through words that we sort of attract people to ourselves, and we are able to tell them, what we stand for, and, you try and understand what you stand for.
Yeah.
So it's really, really important, and I think I wish more people would pay attention to it.
Absolutely. And I think it's very, very important to that founders understand this more than, because a lot of the times I found fantastic founders who are not great storytellers. And my mentor used to always say that never tell a story without a point, or a point without a story. Right?
Well said.
So I think with that, it's a perfect segue. Archana, this is rapid fire. Now you will not get time to answer. Whatever first comes to your mind. I've got about 15 questions. Maybe I'll get about 10 of them through. Whatever first comes to mind, and I'm sure we'll find some insight over there and get into a bit of a tangent. So are you ready for rapid fire?
Absolutely.
Great. So first question, what is the last book you read that had a profound impact on you?
Jim Simmons.
With the book was?
On Jim Simmons, I forget the exact name. Basically, it's his life and how, from a math professor, how
see.
he got into
We'll
quant.
put the link in the comments.
I will. In fact, I've gifted this book to everybody in my team because I
Wonderful.
think it's such a, it tells you that when you, and he failed for a long time. I mean, he was at the top of his game as a math professor, and everybody thought he was mad to try and sort of figure out, investing in the stock market. And he failed for a long time because, to get a bunch of math nerds to, sort of look at quant and say, okay, this is how it'll play out. And, so I put a little sort of note to everybody in the team saying, it's a good exemplification that when you think differently, life, and he changed how you invest in capital markets, right? I mean, there's his politics, which is another story altogether, but you can really change the world if you think differently.
Wonderful. I've looked forward to reading it. I haven't read the
I'll
book
gift
yet.
it to you as well.
Thank you so much. Work-life balance, myth or reality?
Myth.
Why do you say that?
I think work is life and life is work.
Wow.
I think there aren't these compartments that people like to talk about. If you were to, let's say somebody falls sick and you're working, and let's say you are an important part of a team. So what is the workplace supposed to say that, no, we can't accept that part of your life, right? And similarly, let's say work is overflowing into it becoming a long day for months on end. So what are you supposed to say that, no, things are not neatly packaged with a little bow on top of it.
It's so true.
So you've got to embrace everything, and everything sort of finds its own level. And you've got to trust that.
If there is one thing you would like to change about the Indian startup ecosystem, what would that be?
I would want people to be more straightforward.
More straightforward. In like, are you talking about founders? Or everybody?
No, I think everybody. I think in India we spend too much time trying to be complex, whereas I think there's a higher order of intelligence when you're straightforward, because you're so confident about what you are putting out there that you don't have to hide behind words or actions. So what you see is what you get is the most efficient way to live, is to my mind.
Yeah, I think it's, if I may rephrase it a little bit, it would say that if you can explain what you're trying to do in 3 sentences, you're probably way smarter or way more clearer.
Absolutely.
Than someone who take an entire page to explain what they're doing.
Absolutely.
What's one meal you could eat forever?
Varan bhat.
Varan bhat.
So varan is dal, Maharashtrian way of making dal. Bhat is rice. So
wonderful.
Yeah, so it's I could eat it forever.
Wow. Okay. Let's see. A song that motivates you on a particularly difficult day. It could be Hindi. It could be English.
That is, I mean, I like a lot of music. I think Leonard Cohen maybe would, I think because he's more of a poet writer, and I mean, he has a more sort of a, the actual composition of music is a bit more understated.
I see.
And the way he uses words is I think very, very powerful. And I think a really well written song expresses parts of how and what we are as humans.
True.
Which I think it's very hard to do otherwise.
Yeah, and actually songs can actually change emotions so quickly for you, right? If there was a time machine, right, and hopefully there'll be one very soon, and you were allowed to speak to yourself when you were 18, what's one piece of advice you would give yourself?
I want to be 18 when Steve Jobs was 18, and then I just want to talk to him. That's what
But that would really be a different kind of a time machine.
I don't care. If technology is going to get me there, I'm okay. Why settle for less?
But would
than
you
that?
change, and would you tell yourself anything that, don't do this or do this?
I think, we did discuss, or we did touch upon gender a little bit at the beginning of the conversation. I think, women in India don't have enough role models, and I wish at 18, while I believed that there was limitless possibilities, I wish I had believed far more deeply and acted on it far more than I did.
Like of you yourself becoming a role model?
No, of believing in the limitlessness
I see.
of
Okay.
one's own potential.
Wonderful, yeah.
And not being sort of
So
held
true.
back
So true.
by either circumstance or gender. I think we live a lot more in our heads, and
Yeah.
especially when you're 18, you live a lot in your head, and you accept things as your reality, which is actually not your reality.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a deep thought, actually, right? Sometimes we put the levels or we put the lids on ourselves
Exactly.
more than the lids that actually exist out
Exactly.
there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If it weren't for venture capital, what would you be doing?
I'd probably start a beauty business. I feel that a BPC. I feel that and I've had this conversation with some other GPs that I feel that there's so many gaps in the market, and I keep thinking I wish I could find founders and I could give them those ideas. I think we've not even scratched the surface when it comes to what all could get built out. Technology fascinates me, and I think there is sort of a combination of the two things to come together. I think right now it's either a platform. I think it's very, very sort of cursory and shallow, but I do think that there is I think to build a great brand, again, to go back to the whole Steve Jobs hero worship that I have, is that how he thought about everything so differently, whether it was the retail part of it, whether it was the how he thought about mobiles, how he thought about the software, the hardware. I mean, that's just incredible how he thought about the brand, the marketing. I think the joy of building something like that, and again, it comes back to my point about being contrarian.
Yeah.
So he was completely contrarian. So I think there's a great joy in that.
An app you're completely obsessed with right now?
Oops. It'll show my dirty secrets. Insta.
Insta? Okay.
Sadly.
I think all of us are in some way. What's the first thing that you do when you wake up in the morning?
Check my phone.
Check your phone? Are you checking Insta first?
I do check Insta first. I've got some very good deals from Insta, so I'm obsessed.
And your Insta handle?
It's at Jahagirdar.52.
So the best time so maybe the best way to reach out to you is probably to message you on Insta right up in the morning.
Yeah, that's actually a lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn. So I do spend a lot of time on LinkedIn as well.
Achha.
So yeah, so LinkedIn is also a good way to get in touch.
Now maybe my last question. What's one quality that you're looking for in an investor? Sorry, in an entrepreneur?
Vision.
Vision. And how would he or she communicate that to you?
I think you don't need to communicate it. I think, it's pretty evident when somebody has a larger purpose. I think founders should build for something far larger and bigger than themselves. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that, we'll build this global company sitting out of India. That's rubbish. That's not vision. You basically borrowed somebody else's words and somebody else's idea of what you should be doing. Vision is where you're so driven, like I said earlier also, that you're so driven by wanting to build something that you want, which will be a change agent, without, and I'm not even defining the sector, category, like, anything can be a change agent, right? And that sort of outlives you and is bigger than you. And if you don't have that sense of purpose, you will make money, you will have, to my mind, middling success. And my point is that why settle for middling? Settle for really leave a legacy behind. So I mean, I think it's hard to find those founders. But the day you do find them and you feel, wow, like, it makes everything worth it.
With that, I think I have nothing more to say today.
Oh, dear God.
Archana, thank you so much. It really has been an enlightening conversation. And I really love, I think one of the, at least the profound realizations from this conversation is that there are certain building blocks that we may or may not know how they're going to land up and help us out later on in life. But in your case, the fact that you could write so well and that has helped you articulate what is very much a opaque science for most people, but there is a science, maybe there is a bit of art behind it. And the way you've explained it very naturally, with very simple words, without using all the hashtags we could have used, has really been amazing. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did too.
I did. In fact, I think you're putting it really well. So I think we've got a little mutual admiration society going on, which is always a good thing to have between GPs, right?
Yes, absolutely. And
nobody else appreciates us.
Yeah. But I really look forward to the fact that we'll communicate outside, because the only two times we've met, once on a panel and once on Damani Talk. So we'll hopefully look forward to communicating again outside of this.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Bye.